The Nile doesn't just carry water, it carries memory and scent. That part people often forget. The banks of this winding river weren't just the breadbasket of Egypt. They were a fragrant corridor of flora and fantasy. You step barefoot along the silted edge. It's late afternoon, and the wind is thick with moisture and crushed greenery. You pass through clouds of wild mint, fields of papyrus, and the occasional splash of citrus-like sycamore resin. And then it hits you. The Nile smells alive. For Cleopatra, this wasn't just landscape. It was her perfume aisle. The Nile Delta Bet's lush, fan-shaped northern region was a perfume factory in slow motion. Blue lotus flowers bloomed in the still waters, their petals unfolding like delicate scrolls at dawn. This flower wasn't just pretty, it was powerful. Its oil was used in perfumes, its scent mildly narcotic. Priests inhaled it during ceremonies. Cleopatra, it's believed, may have worn it as a signature, noted dreamy, seductive, floral, with the undertone of a secret. And then there's the myrrh. Oh, the sticky, bittersweet gold of the ancient world, harvested by slicing into small trees and letting the sap bleed like honey. Myrrh had been traded for centuries before Cleopatra's reign. It was antiseptic, aromatic, and everywhere from mummy wrappings to temple rituals. And yes, from time to time, inside Cleopatra's bathwater, historians still argue whether Cleopatra herself actively gathered ingredients along the Nile or left it to her chemists. But let's be honest, picturing her now in sandals and a linen shift, trailing her fingers through the reeds, nodding toward a flowering shrub and murmuring that one, because ruling wasn't always about decrees. Sometimes it was about taste and smell. Further inland, fields of henna plants brushed the breeze with a faint sharpness, almost like fresh hay. Henna wasn't just for tattoos or hair dye. Mixed with oils, it created a woodsy scent that aged beautifully on the skin. And if you were royalty, your oils weren't made with sunflower seed base. They used balsamer thick, luxurious resin extracted in microscopic amounts from delicate trees grown only in sacred groves. Cleopatra's suppliers likely went through ridiculous lengths to secure just a few tiny vials. Now, let's talk about papyrus. Yes, the same stuff they wrote on. When crushed, its stems gave off a scent of green, celery-like sharpness that lingered faintly in the air. Papyrus oil was used not just in perfumes, but in room fresheners, like the ancient Egyptian version of a reed diffuser. Just imagine her palace, breezy courtyards filled with the aroma of papyrus stuffed, pillows warmed by the sun. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptians loved scent so much they sometimes wore it on their heads. Like literally, they'd create wax cones infused with scented oils, perch them on their wigs or hair, and let the heat of the day melt them slowly. As the wax liquefied, it released aroma throughout the day, sort of like a very fashionable slow-release air freshener. Cleopatra probably didn't need that trick, but you can bet she knew about it now. You're back along the water. Evening is falling. You smell the first burn of incense coming from a distant temple. Somewhere behind a sand dune, a priest lights a brazier filled with kifi, and the smoke drifts lazily toward the river, trailing cinnamon, raisins, and the faintest trace of wine. And suddenly, the Nile isn't just a river. It's an archive, one that doesn't store scrolls or papyri but fragrance. Each bend of its body a different blend of floral, fruit, and spice. It's not hard to see why Cleopatra believed scent could move people, even before words did. The Nile's breeze worked like an invisible army. It entered rooms before she did. It filled marketplaces with whispers, and it made even a simple boat ride into a parade of presence. You imagine Antony on his warship, catching that first hint of incense on the wind, long before her barge rounded the bend, and realizing she's already winning. But nature wasn't her only perfumer. The land offered her ingredients, yes, but she layered them with intention. She understood the art of contrast, the bitterness of myrrh against the sweetness of rose, the dark punch of balsam beneath a veil of citrus blossom, like composing music, but in molecules. The Nile offered Cleopatra more than a garden. It offered her a palate, and the scents she plucked from it weren't just for pleasure. They were tools. They told stories. They made promises. They said, "I come from this land, but I smell like nothing you've ever known." And now, drifting with the current, your feet skimming water that's still scented from 2,000 years ago, you can't help but wonder if you wore that exact same blend, would people follow you too? Or maybe, just maybe, that's the point. The scent was never meant to be copied. It was hers, like the Nile itself, one queen, one current, one unforgettable breath. Hey guys, tonight we're sailing down the Nile under a lavender sky, where papyrus reeds sway and the water glitters like poured oil. You catch a breeze and with it, something delicate and wild. Crushed rose petals, a whisper of myrrh, maybe. The faintest trace of blue lotus. That's no accident. You've just inhaled power. Perfume wasn't just vanity in ancient Egypt. For Cleopatra, it was strategy. Aromas were her unspoken language of seduction, yes, but also of rule, of memory, of survival. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not because it's dangerous, but because by the time we're done talking about oil infusions and sacred resins, you might never look at your moisturizer the same way again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you're watching. I love knowing who's listening and when. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you need to know is that Cleopatra didn't walk into a room. She arrived, not with noise or stomping, but with atmosphere. Witnesses claimed you could smell her before you saw her. Her robes were steeped in oils. Her hair carried the aroma of honey and crushed herbs. When she greeted Julius Caesar or Mark Antony, it wasn't just her words doing the talking. It was the perfume, soft, exotic, impossibly expensive, whispered, "I am not like anyone else you've met." Mainstream historians agree Cleopatra VII was a master of perception. She spoke 9 languages. She studied medicine. She ruled a crumbling kingdom with a smile sharper than most swords. But her brilliance wasn't just intellect, it was in crafting her ideology. In ancient Egypt, a queen's power had to smell. Divine, literally. Fragrance, back then, meant more than elegance. It meant life force. To be scented was to be blessed. The pharaohs used oils to anoint themselves as living gods. Temples burned incense morning and night. Embalmers swaddled mummies in myrrh and cinnamon, not just for preservation, but to sweeten the soul for its journey. Cleopatra understood all of that and upgraded it. She transformed scent from ritual into performance, into a signature. If power was invisible, she made it visible. By making it smell unmistakably like her, you find yourself wondering what she used. Was it lotus oil with hints of cardamom? Was it the bark of the terebinth tree? One Greek source claimed she bathed in milk and rose essence every day. Another swore her pillows were stuffed with cinnamon bark. Historians still argue whether these tales are true or a blend of propaganda and ancient fan fiction. Roman chroniclers weren't exactly neutral. Some called her irresistible. Others said she bewitched men with potions. A few just grumbled about the way her ship made the harbor smell like heaven on fire. Here's the quirky bit. In 2012, archaeologists unearthed an ancient Egyptian perfumery in the city of Thebes. Inside were tiny jars, still holding remnants of oils and spices. Researchers recreated a scent from the residue and claimed it might have been worn by Cleopatra herself. The result: earthy, spicy, musky, not light, not floral. It was commanding. Like stepping into a room and owning it with one breath. But you wouldn't need a lab to believe in Cleopatra's aroma. You'd only need to imagine Alexandria's palace halls, sandalwood smoke curling from golden braziers, linen curtains soaked in kifi, a ceremonial perfume made from over 16 ingredients, raisins, wine, honey, frankincense, and more. It was boiled and aged like fine wine, designed to ease the mind and open the senses. Priests used it for rituals. Cleopatra likely used it for everything, because to her, scent was theatre. When she sailed to meet Antony, it wasn't just a royal barge. It was a floating perfume ad. The sails were soaked in exotic oils. As she glided up the river, locals ran to the banks, not because of the noise, but because the air changed. It shimmered. It promised stories. And she, reclining beneath a gold canopy, was the story's beating heart. And here's the twist. This wasn't just personal branding, it was geopolitical chess. Rome saw Egypt as chaotic, sensual, mysterious. Cleopatra leaned into that image. With calculated grace, she used scent to reinforce her identity as both goddess and ruler, as Isis reborn, as the Nile herself fertile, elusive, necessary. You picture her now, seated at her vanity. A low stone table, dozens of little alabaster flasks, an assistant grinding petals and herbs in a bowl, the scent in the air, heady and sweet, with a punch of bitterness. Maybe something like Norelli, maybe something that doesn't exist anymore, and maybe that's the real magic. Her perfumes have evaporated into time, but the idea remains. The notion that a scent can conquer, that power can waft from skin and hair and linen, that identity can be inhaled. You breathe in slowly. The Nile breeze carries a whisper of jasmine, or maybe just a hint of history. Either way, it's working. The past is unfolding in invisible trails. You're standing now in the cool shadow of Cleopatra's personal sanctuary, somewhere tucked behind the pillars and papyrus-lined courtyards of her royal compound. The air smells like crushed flowers and warm stone. This isn't a throne room. No courtiers, no generals. Just stone jars, copper tools, woven trays of herbs drying in the sun. You're in her laboratory, her olfactory war room, because Cleopatra wasn't just a user of perfume. She was a maker. Aromatics in her world weren't passive luxuries. They were alchemy, and she treated them as seriously as a modern chemist treats compounds. The term perfume comes from Latin perfumum, through smoke, but Cleopatra's recipes were more like elixirs. Potent combinations of oils, resins, animal fats, flowers, and even the occasional charred root. She knew her way around a formula. Mainstream historical records are a bit foggy here. The Romans painted Cleopatra as indulgent and hedonistic, but archaeological findings tell another story. Excavations of ancient Egyptian perfume workshops in Alexandria suggest there were whole teams dedicated to producing custom blends. And Cleopatra, ever the micromanager of her image, likely curated her own personal mixtures with exacting control. Historians still argue whether she authored actual fragrance manuals, or if those writings were attributed to her by later alchemists. Some say a now lost work called On Cosmetics included her recipes for facial oils, breath fresheners, and of course, perfume. Others insist she collaborated with Greek doctors who moonlighted as perfumers. But what's likely? She supervised every drop that went into her bottles. Here's your quirky tidbit. Among the strangest ingredients that may have made their way into her concoctions was civet musca, secretion from a small cat-like animal that, when aged and diluted, gave perfumes a soft, animalistic warmth. Imagine Cleopatra hunched over a stone mixing slab, dabbing civet next to myrrh and crushed violet petals, balancing earth and bloom with an artist's instinct. And of course, there's the blue lotus oil. Again and again it comes up, like a perfume chorus line, extracted through a process that involves soaking the petals in fat, often goose fat, or oil of banand, then pressing and filtering over days, sometimes weeks. The result, a subtle floral scent with mildly psychoactive properties. Cleopatra's perfume wasn't just smell, it was mood management. The process wasn't glamorous. You picture vats of rendered animal fat, mortar full of dark resin, racks of clay, amphorae aging under the hot sun. This wasn't a spot, was a sensory forge. The ingredients steeped for weeks in oil. Some were left to age for months, acquiring depth and nuance like aged wine. Perfume wasn't a last-minute spritz, it was a long game, and she knew how to bottle time. One ancient method of infusion involved enfleurage, where flowers were laid out on sheets of animal fat and left for days, their scent slowly absorbed. It was labor-intensive and demanded patience, but Cleopatra wasn't interested in shortcuts. If a blend required 2 lunar cycles to reach peak aroma, so be it. Let's zoom in for a moment. You're holding a small alabaster vial in your palm. It's heavy, cool, inside. Perhaps Cleopatra's signature night perfume. A blend of frankincense, myrrh, orange blossom, and spikenard. Rich, musky, smoky sweet. She applies it sparingly just behind the ears, along the collarbone, and behind the knees. Why there? Because that's where your pulse is strongest. And perfume, after all, is nothing if it doesn't move with you. The most elite oils were stored in unguentariums, delicate glass bottles or ceramic flasks, sealed with linen and beeswax. These vessels were tucked into cool niches and guarded by attendants, not because they were breakable, but because they were irreplaceable. Some ingredients came from across the sea, others from temple-run groves. You didn't just replace a perfume if it ran out, you mourned it. And still, Cleopatra wasn't content with just smelling beautiful. She wanted her space to smell beautiful. Perfume clung to her rooms, her clothing, even her scrolls. It's said she had perfumes burned in censers as she wrote letters, so her words would carry her scent. Imagine Mark Antony receiving a note and catching the trace of spikenard and wine. No signature required. He'd know exactly who sent it. You lean against the stone bench in her lab. The tools are simple. Copper grinders, cloth filters, stone bowls. Nothing digital, nothing sterile. Just ancient elegance. And somehow, the results were more lasting than anything you'd find at a luxury mall today. The thing about Cleopatra is she didn't let others define beauty for her. She defined it through her senses, and then she bottled it. And as you step back into the hallway, past the bowls of steeping petals, past the chilled vials resting in the dark hue, realize every scent told a story, not just to those around her, but to herself. Each perfume, a spell, a memory, a secret. You take one last breath, thick with cinnamon and crushed rosazen. The scent follows you like a whisper, not just from Cleopatra's world, but through it. The heat rises gently from the limestone floors as you step into Cleopatra's private bath chamber. It's not the kind of room meant for scrubbing or splashing. This is a sanctuary, more temple than tub. Columns rise like incense smoke into a ceiling painted with stars. Light pours through high, latticed windows, turning steam into golden fog. You inhale slowly, and what you smell isn't just cleanliness, it's ritual. Because for Cleopatra, bathing wasn't about washing the day away. It was about rebirth, and every bath she took was a performance. The tub itself, likely carved from alabaster or polished granite, gleams with a soft shimmer. Perfumed oils float lazily on the surface. You can see them, a swirl of violet, saffron, and deep amber spreading across the water like silk unraveling. This isn't water anymore. It's liquid memory. The most famous rumor, of course, is that Cleopatra bathed in donkey milk. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of donkeys were allegedly kept just to supply her daily soak. The milk was believed to soften the skin, reduce wrinkles, and add a subtle, sweet scent to the body. Historians still argue whether she truly bathed in milk or if it was symbolic, more of a myth woven by later admirers. But the idea stuck because, well, it's fabulously decadent. Your quirky tidbit: ancient Egyptian physicians considered donkey milk a medicinal tonic, not just a cosmetic one. Some even prescribed it for liver ailments and melancholy. So technically, Cleopatra was multitasking, moisturizing, and managing existential dread. Now the steam thickens. Assistants silent as shadows bring in stone bowls filled with kefi. That intoxicating blend of myrrh, wine, honey, and crushed herbs. It's burned slowly on bronze braziers. The scent snakes into your lungs and warms you from the inside. Some believed kefi calmed the gods. Cleopatra used it to calm her own nerves before a political meeting or a romantic encounter. And here's something that might surprise you: Cleopatra's bath likely didn't end with just soaking. There were stages: oils to apply post-bath, clays to tighten the skin, gels made of aloe, frankincense, and myrrh. She knew that skin wasn't just skin, it was the first language people read when they met her. So she made it glow. One favorite ingredient: moringa oil. Rich, earthy, and long-lasting, it was pressed from seeds and used as a deep moisturizer. Today it's trendy in skincare serums, but Cleopatra may have had vats of it by her bathside. Mixed with blue lotus or sandalwood, it absorbed quickly and left a subtle sheen like moonlight trapped under your skin. The bathing room was also where Cleopatra practiced scent layering. She didn't rely on a single perfume to carry her presence. She stacked scents like melodies, each one designed to emerge over time. First the citrus and rose in her hair rinse, then the myrrh in her bath, then the frankincense oil on her wrists. By the time she stepped into a room, the air shifted like curtains in her wake, and it wasn't just her. Elite Egyptian women of the period had complex beauty regimens, often passed down from mothers and temple healers. Perfume and bathing were intertwined with spirituality, fertility, even mourning. To bathe was to connect to the gods, to the self, and to the soul of the land. Imagine this: Cleopatra soaking silently, her eyes half closed, her pulse slowing with the rhythm of the dripping water. Outside, Egypt bustles, scribes copying orders, traders unloading boats, couriers pacing anxiously. But in here, stillness. Time doesn't tick. It pools, and when she rises from the water glistening, fragrant, impossibly serene, it's not just a physical transformation. It's strategic. She's emerging as Cleopatra, ruler and goddess incarnate. That bath wasn't indulgent. It was armor. There's even a theory that her bathwater was sometimes laced with rose quartz powder, crushed into fine dust and stirred in to promote beauty vibrations. Historians still argue whether this was real practice or spiritual folklore, but the idea fits. Cleopatra never underestimated the psychological impact of ritual. As she towels herself with fine linen lightly scented, naturally you see the final step. A tiny clay vessel, opened by hand, revealing a paste of cinnamon and honey, dabbed onto her pulse points. Not just to scent, to heat. It draws blood closer to the skin, gives her a subtle flush. She looks healthy, radiant, very slightly, dangerous. She knew that fragrance wasn't just for attraction, it was about command. Because when you smell like confidence and divinity and maybe just a hint of mystery, people lean closer. They listen, and now you, standing in the midst of her abandoned chamber, feel the leftover warmth in the stone, catch the final tendrils of cinnamon and lotus drifting through the air. You realize this wasn't a bath. This was a performance space, and every detail was rehearsed, perfected, and delivered again and again until the scent of Cleopatra became as famous as her voice. And maybe, as you draw the curtain closed and step back into the hallway, a little of that fragrance clings to you too. You're walking now beside the river the Nile, thick and slow like poured syrup in the dusk. The banks hum with crickets, and palm fronds click like fingernails overhead. The sky is bruised purple, and as the breeze lifts your hair, you catch it, that scent, earthy, sweet, a little green, a little smoky. This is no random gust. This is the scented Nile breeze, and it's carrying the perfume of a civilization. Here's what they don't tell you about ancient Egypt. It didn't just look golden. It smelled golden too. The air was never neutral. It was filled with the aromas of burning resins, flower fields in bloom, crushed papyrus, and temple incense wafting across the cityscape. Even the Nile itself brought smells: wet red, algae, sunbathing on the surface, distant campfire smoke from fishermen grilling tilapia on their boats. Cleopatra would have smelled it all, every day, like a shifting perfume that belonged to the land itself. Historians still argue whether scent memories shaped how Egyptians experienced power, but you can imagine Cleopatra strolling the riverbank, her gold sandals sinking into soft soil, noting which time of year the orange blossoms carried strongest, or how the river's smell changed after rain. She didn't just walk the world, she soundtracked it. In fact, smell had status. The poorer classes, whose daily lives involved manual labor and crowded living spaces, often struggled to mask body odor. But Cleopatra, she had access to oils, powders, and perfumes that made her stand out like a deity among mortals. And not just because she applied scent, but because she lived in it. Let's step off the main road and into a grove of henna shrubs, their blossoms thick and heavy. Cleopatra may have walked here too, collecting henna for her elaborate hair dyes and body art. Henna, when prepared, releases a scent somewhere between fresh hay and wet wood. Not floral, but grounding, and it lingered. You reach out, and the blossoms crumble in your fingers like sun-baked paper. Here's your quirky tidbit. Cleopatra reportedly anointed her palace sails with perfume, so that when she arrived by barge, typically one carved with gold, studded with lapis lazuli, and draped in silk, people smelled her coming before they even saw her. According to Plutarch, her sails were soaked in incense and rose water, and the breeze carried her presence ahead like a scented herald, and she knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't just rule with armies, she ruled with atmosphere. If the air could whisper divine, then she made it shout. Imagine standing on the riverbank, eyes closed, waiting for that first trace of frankincense on the wind. You'd know she was near. Even temples along the Nile had distinct aromatic identities. Temple priests were essentially scent artists. They burned kifi during the evening hours, a mixture so complex that it required up to 16 ingredients and days of preparation. Some scholars think Cleopatra had personal access to the priests' recipes, fragrant scrolls containing the proportions of cinnamon, cassia, mastic, and raisins soaked in wine. These weren't random potions. These were olfactory rituals tied to divine timing. The ingredients changed slightly with the moon, the tides, even political events. And when burned, the air became sacred. You walk farther and past stalls selling pressed oil cakes for lampsies. Even the lights smelled of something. Imagine her palace glowing not with sterile flames, but with wicks dipped in jasmine oil, sandalwood, or ambergris. Light and scent were married in her world, and she wasn't alone. Scent rituals permeated all classes. Women carried scent cones on their heads at banquets, waxy domes filled with oils that melted slowly over the course of the evening, releasing perfume as they danced. Cleopatra might have worn one carved into the shape of a lotus, slowly dissolving into her braids as the evening wore on. Even the air had its own rhythm, hot during the day, dry by noon, and perfumed again by evening as flowers exhaled under moonlight. You'd smell orange blossoms opening, dates warming in the sun, night jasmine emerging like a secret. Here's something you might not expect. Cleopatra had seasonal perfumes, just like today's designer lines. In the spring, she favored lighter blends, citrus, lotus, maybe touches of mint or tamarind flower. In the summer, heavier basis resin, myrrh labdanum. The idea wasn't to fight the heat, it was to blend with it. Let the sun activate the oils. Let sweat become part of the scent. That's the thing, her perfumes weren't about hiding her humanity, they were about enhancing it. You pause now by the river's edge, and the wind picks up again. It smells like wet linen, fig trees, and distant sandalwood smoke. It smells ancient. Cleopatra would have known every ingredient in that breeze. She would have smiled, tucked her hair behind her ear, and said, "Yes, the air smells ripe today." Because even silence carried scent. And when words failed, when diplomacy stalled, or love went sour, Cleopatra let her perfume speak. You sit on a warm stone, the Nile lapping quietly below. Your eyes close, and the last scent you catch, before sleep pulls you under, is blue lotus again, faint, familiar, like a queen passing by in the wind. You wake up, figuratively, because you're still deep in this slow motion, dream inside a room entirely devoted to one thing. Bent craft shelves curve like amphitheater steps around you, each stacked with alabaster jars, tiny terracotta vials, and papyrus scrolls inked in formulas. This is Cleopatra's personal perfumery lab, a place where fragrance wasn't just created, was composed. Yes, forget your image of perfume as a luxury indulgence. To Cleopatra, it was science, strategy, a kind of invisible alchemy of power. Now, here's the historical backbone. Perfumes in ancient Egypt were made with meticulous attention to ingredients, seasonality, and even celestial timing. Cleopatra's lab was likely modeled after the Temple of Horus at Edfu, where a sacred perfumery school once operated. Recipes weren't casual guesses, they were sacred mathematics. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra herself mixed her perfumes, or left it to expert apothecaries. But scrolls suggest she had a deep personal interest. And wouldn't you imagine having access to ingredients like cardamom harvested during lunar festivals, frankincense imported from Punt, and rose oil pressed under the first full moon of spring? And if she didn't grind the ingredients herself, she still orchestrated it. You can picture her seated cross-legged on cool tiles, swiping her fingers through trays of powdered clove and sandalwood, eyes half-lidded in focus. There was music playing, maybe a reed flute, maybe just the low rustle of the Nile through open lattice windows. Let's zoom in on one recipe, possibly Cleopatra's favorite, a perfume called Mendician. It was a luxurious blend of myrrh, cinnamon, and resin in a base of moringa oil, thick, golden, and almost edible. And the scent, heavy, spicy, warm, the kind of smell that enters a room before you do and lingers long after you've left. Your quirky tidbit: the ancient version of this perfume was found preserved in an Egyptian alabaster bottle, 3,000 years old, and still faintly aromatic. When scientists recreated it in modern labs, they found it eerily intoxicating, sweet at first, then smoky, like fire and fruit tangled together, and Cleopatra likely used it strategically, not just to seduce, but to intimidate. Imagine greeting Roman diplomats in Alexandria's palace, the air pulsing with Mendician oil. You're disoriented before she even speaks. Each perfume in her arsenal had a role. One blend for diplomatic meetings, one for private audiences, one perhaps used only for lovers. Think of it as emotional programming via aroma. Now, over to that marble basin in the center of the room. It's filled with water steeped in lotus petals, blue and white both, which soften the mood and enhance mental clarity. Cleopatra reportedly believed blue lotus enhanced dreams. Some say she even used it as a mild narcotic. Historians still argue whether it had psychoactive properties or just made her feel floatier than usual. As you breathe in, you catch a layer of labdanum resin from rock rose, sticky and dark. It's the soul of the perfume. Warm, leathery, slightly sweet. It gave Cleopatra's blends a bass note that clung to skin like a memory. Every part of this lab was arranged for intentional scent layering. From the top notes neroli, mint to the grounding elements cedar, patchouli, and benzoin, each oil was part of a sensory symphony. And Cleopatra, she was the conductor. Here's where it gets clever. Some recipes included a small amount of acacia gum, not for scent, but to bind the aroma to the skin longer. Imagine applying perfume in the morning and still catching faint traces after nightfall. Cleopatra didn't need to reapply. Her skin held onto stories. And then there were the rituals, opening perfume jars only during certain phases of the moon, whispering intentions over the oils, blessing ingredients with incantations. Even in sleep, Cleopatra let the oils work on her. Some recipes were designed for nighttime use, calming blends of chamomile, poppy, and almond to keep her calm and dreams vivid. One jar you spot painted with hieroglyphs and sealed with beeswaxes, labeled with the symbol for soul. Perfumes, in her belief system, weren't just for the living. They followed you into the afterlife. Pause for a second. Think about that. Cleopatra didn't separate beauty from legacy. She wore what she wanted the gods to smell when she arrived. On the other side, you lean in now, cracking open a jar of something pale and metallic smelling perhaps. Cleopatra may have used it sparingly, because its sharpness cut through softer aromas. But just a drop could reshape an entire blend. Like adding thunder to music. In the corner, you find scrolls with diagrams, yes, diagrams mapping scent flows. Through rooms. She didn't just scent herself. She scented her spaces, incense by the doorway, fragrance cones in the corners, oils dripped into oil lamps. When guests entered, they were walking into her world, and once you were in it, the perfume didn't let you go. Hours later, days even, you'd catch a whiff of something familiar and wonder if Cleopatra had passed nearby. The scent stayed with you, a haunting, a calling card. You close the scroll. You press your fingers to a clay jar's warm lid. You breathe it all in sweetness, smoke, the temps of crushed herbs, and it fills you with that same golden heaviness the queen herself must have felt after mixing the final drops into a bottle sealed with wax. The lab goes still, even the breeze pauses. And now you understand. Perfume wasn't just Cleopatra's signature. It was her language, her diplomacy, her seduction, her resistance. Her scent wasn't an accessory. It was a weapon. You drift into the afternoon sun of Alexandria now, where Cleopatra's presence lingers not just in temples or palaces, but in the city's wind itself. Because here's a secret. She didn't stop at perfuming herself or her chambers. Cleopatra perfumed the breeze. The port of Alexandria is bustling in the distance, merchants shouting over crates of saffron, ivory, and scrolls. But your attention is caught by something softer. A waft of air brushes past your cheek, and it smells intentional. Not just the salt of the Mediterranean, but jasmine, musk, and a whisper of cinnamon. You're standing in a scented current. This wasn't magic. It was logistics. Cleopatra engineered the environment around her with floating perfume rituals. According to ancient writings, she would scent entire spaces using incense, braziers, flower-stuffed linens, and oil-laced fans. But here's the real flex. Some historians argue she even had her royal barge soaked in essential oils. Yes, her ship smelled like paradise. The Roman historian Plutarch described it. Cleopatra's arrival by river wasn't just a vision, it was a scented event. Her barge's sails were drenched in rose and neroli oils, the oars smeared with cinnamon resin. As she sailed up the Nile to meet Mark Antony, the breeze carried her perfume ahead of her, so, long before anyone saw her, they smelled her. The scent arrived like a rumor. It's the ancient version of entering a room to your own theme music. And better because theme music fades. But a good perfume, it clings to your clothes, your hair, even your memory. Cleopatra knew that she didn't just leave footprints, she left fragrance trails. Now you're watching her attendants work, dozens of them, some steep flower petals in wine to be misted into silked curtains. Others pound resin into soft paste to smear on terracotta urns, warmed by the sun, turning them into natural diffusers. A few even soaked linen ribbons in jasmine oil and hang them from trees along her garden paths. So the breeze shakes them into release. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some ancient Egyptian temples reportedly perfumed their courtyards by burying spices in the floor. So when people walked across, they pressed out scent, like primitive scratch and sniff tiles. Cleopatra likely adapted that after all. Every step in her palace was part of the theatre. It all sounds extravagant, doesn't it? But there was meaning woven in every aromatic thread. The Egyptians believed scent was divine breath. The gods recognized you not by your face, but by your fragrance. So perfuming the air wasn't indulgent. It was a form of prayer. A way to declare, I am sacred, I am seen. And Cleopatra took it further. Remember the Mendesian perfume from earlier. Some believe she soaked her sails in it, not just to seduce Antony, but to lay claim to the wind. In a way, she turned nature itself into a messenger. Birds carry news. Cool. But what if the breeze whispers your story? Historians still argue whether these legends are literal or poetic exaggeration, but scrolls from temple archives and Roman accounts point to this truth. Scent was Cleopatra's atmosphere. She made it part of her aura, and it worked. People were enchanted, disoriented, caught somewhere between memory and magic. You walked now through the palace gardens, down an aisle shaded with acacia trees, where fruit hangs like wax sculptures. Beneath your feet, crushed petals release every step. You pass by a fountain not filled with water, but with rose water, rippling with the scent of 1,000 blooms. And over there, yes, there you spot slaves fanning large ostrich feather fans that have been dipped in mint oil. The queen didn't like stale air. She wanted circulation. But she wanted the wind to carry something more than just coolness. It had to carry meaning. Here's where the ideology sharpens. To Cleopatra, aroma was territory. The more space her scent filled, the more space she owned, spiritually and politically. The breeze was a map, and she was drawing her borders with invisible ink. And when Antony smelled her before seeing her, that wasn't an accident. That was psychological warfare, as prelude as performance. And yes, let's talk about Antony, because he wasn't immune. According to some accounts, Cleopatra designed each encounter with him to include a different signature scent. One for arrival, one for dining, one for sleep. Think about that. She was building an emotional olfactory archive in his mind. So, later, when he was far away, the whiff of myrrh on someone's robe would stab him with longing. You sit now beside a bronze incense burner shaped like a falcon. It's smoldering, slowly, spitting out curls of sweet smoke that drift like lazy jellyfish into the warm air. You catch a note of juniper, another of myrtle. The smoke rolls around your legs, then lifts like a sigh. This is how the palace breathed. And you're breathing it in to dot by now. Your senses are tuned to the notes, the high ones that dance, the middling ones that hug, the bass notes that haunt. This isn't just perfume, it's geography. Cleopatra mapped her life in layers of scent. And as the Nile breeze slides across your skin, you realize you're walking through her biography, and it smells beautiful. The Nile doesn't rush, it unfolds, smooth, like oil slipping through fingers. And tonight, you're sailing down it with Cleopatra, the queen of scent and spectacle. Not a voyage of war, not even diplomacy, just a floating sanctuary, perfumed, down to the ropes. Her barge glides like a dream painted in gold. You're lying beneath a silk canopy where frankincense still clings to the beams. Musicians play softly behind gauzy curtains, and drifting on the breeze, that impossibly delicate blend of blue lotus and honeyed almond oil. It kisses your skin, like sleep itself. But how did Cleopatra know how to build these potions of air? You peek over the side and see a reed boat trailing behind, a floating lab. And there, Surrounded by scrolls and amphorae is her royal perfumer, a woman, one of the few records we have of ancient female chemists. Her name may have been Taputi, or perhaps that's just one name among many lost. But what's certain is this: the perfume makers of ancient Egypt weren't dabblers. They were scientists, priests, and alchemists rolled into one. The recipes were guarded like sacred texts, scrolls locked in temple vaults, ingredient lists that read more like spells than instructions. 7 parts myrrh, 5 parts pine, resin, 3 parts tears of the sycamore. Instructions that include phrases like boil until the stars turn or simmer beneath a waning moon. Here's the mainstream fact: Egypt was the global capital of fragrance for over 1,000 years. Its perfumes were so beloved that the Greeks and Romans hoarded them like treasure. Cleopatra didn't just wear perfume, she exported it. She financed expeditions to find rare ingredients, like labdanum from the cliffs of Cyprus or the elusive nard from India. Her palace even had dedicated stills for distillation. This wasn't just luxury, it was an industry. Now here comes your fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe Cleopatra developed a form of time-release scent layering, meaning she didn't just mix perfumes, she structured them to unfold gradually over hours, kind of like the first wearable narrative, a story on your skin. One version began sharp and citrusy at dawn, mellowed into florals by midday, and curled into resins by evening. You recline again. The air is warm but dry. The night creatures chirp lazily in the papyrus groves, and just above you, a basket of dried lavender pods crackles near a hidden ember, releasing its lullaby. Now, don't think Cleopatra did this all for ego. Well, not just for ego. There was belief woven into every aroma. In Egyptian thought, scent was the invisible thread that tied heaven and earth. Incense was called the sweat of the gods. The act of creating perfume was spiritual labor, often performed in temple labs. You weren't just making a smell, you were conjuring presence, summoning deities into being. Cleopatra understood this. Her perfumes weren't just decoration, they were invocations, which means you're not simply inhaling Blue Lotus tonight. You're sharing breath with Isis, and if you think that sounds poetic, remember this: ancient Egypt didn't separate science and religion. To measure the distillation point of a resin was to understand the will of the divine. To record the scent of rain on limestone was to document emotion. Even the act of bottling a perfume was symbolic, sealing soul inside vessel. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra made her own perfumes or simply directed others. But there are signs, tiny fingerprints, of her taste in every surviving formula. The Mendesian blend, she had that modified with cinnamon bark and carob blossom. The Suprinum base, she added almond oil and powdered iris root. These weren't random choices, they were coded messages. Each blend told a different story. Some flirted, some warned, some promised immortality. And speaking of bottles, let's admire the real Stunners. You reach out now to the alabaster tray beside you. On it, glass ampules, no bigger than your pinky, carved ivory flasks, and tiny amphorae sealed with beeswax. One sparkles with flecks of gold leaf suspended in oil. Another is dyed coral red, with a tiny papyrus reed floating inside like a wick. These were Cleopatra's perfume bottles, and each was a sculpture of secrecy. Ancient Egyptian perfumery wasn't splash and go. It was deliberate, slow, ritualistic. You didn't put on scent, you summoned it. One drop on each wrist, one dab behind each ear, one fingertip pressed just beneath the collarbone, where the blood beats closest to the surface, and the scent didn't just linger, it lived. Your gaze drifts across the deck where attendants now unfurl bundles of linen soaked in flower oils. They drape them over the railings. The wind catches them. Perfume sails again. And here's the clever part. These oils weren't just for show. They protected, too. Egyptian oils kept bugs away, soothed skin from sunburn, and even masked the human scent from wild animals on hunting trips. Beauty meets practicality, Cleopatra's lifelong aesthetic. You lie back and let the barge rock you gently. You're not on the Nile anymore. You're somewhere between then and now, held in that soft pocket of night where dreams gather. One last thought before your eyes slip shut. Cleopatra's genius wasn't just in creating scent, it was in creating memory. Her perfumes outlived her. Even now, archaeologists are trying to recreate her blends from residue found in ancient pots. That means the breath you're taking now, someone might have taken it 2,000 years ago, beneath the same moon, on the same Nile, wrapped in the same scented hush. You wake or maybe dream yourself forward into a dawn barely touching the Nile's shimmering skin. The barge has moored, and the desert yawns beyond the reeds. A perfumed veil still lingers around you, but now it's joined by something earthier. Smoke from incense, and the first temps of sun-warmed sand. Behind Cleopatra's palace walls, the real magic happens. Not in throne rooms or war councils, but in a perfumery tucked behind a colonnade of blue-painted columns, half swallowed by shadow. You drift inside, past baskets of dried herbs and clay jugs sealed with linen and pitch. And suddenly, the air changes. This place smells like eternity. And that's not a metaphor. Egyptians believed scent could bind your soul to the afterlife. Perfume wasn't vanity, was survival strategy. Take Kifi, for example. Kyphi was the most sacred incense. Blend in ancient Egypt, 1 part fragrance, 1 part medicine, 1 part prayer. Think of it as the Chanel No. 5 of the pharaohs. Except it took over 16 ingredients, 7 days, and a minor miracle to make. You had raisins soaked in wine, honey boiled with frankincense, crushed juniper, spikenard, cinnamon, and myrrh. A mysterious ingredient just labeled the good-smelling thing. You lean over the stone mixing slab now, watching an assistant grind resin into powder using a dolerite mortar worn smooth from centuries of use. There's a whisper of citrus, then smoke, then something sharper, almost like leather. It stings your eyes, then calms your lungs. It's working. Mainstream fact. Kifi was burned nightly in temples to honor Ra and lull worshippers into dream states. Plutarch, the Greek philosopher, even wrote that it was a song for the senses. He probably meant that literally it was used to induce visions. Some say Cleopatra used it not just in rituals, but in her bedroom. Sleep wasn't just sleep, was divine communication. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some modern chemists have tried recreating Kifi based on ancient texts, and discovered that it may have had mild psychoactive properties, not hallucinogenic. Exactly, but calming, sedating, and just weird enough to nudge you toward altered states. In other words, Cleopatra might have been microdosing herself into prophetic dreams. Better than melatonin, anyway. Historians still argue whether these recipes were exact sciences or improvisational art. Some scrolls contradict each other. One might list 9 ingredients, another 32. Some say Kifi had to be prepared only under moonlight. Others insist the sunlight purified the resin. but nearly all agree the process was as important as the product. So tonight, you kneel next to that slab and try not to sneeze as powdered myrrh coats your hands. You mix slowly clockwise only, thank you very much, lest the gods get offended, and hum the invocation taught to the temple apprentices. As the moon drinks, so does the soul inhale. The scent changes again. It becomes rounder, warmer, less sharp. You waft it toward your face and feel a heaviness in your limbs. Not exhaustion, just readiness to drift. And it wasn't only incense. You walk to a shelf lined with delicate glass jars. Each holds a perfume paste thicker than oil, rich like beeswax. They were applied with ivory sticks or scooped into gold compacts. You rub one between your fingers. It's like softened butter laced with cardamom and balsam. But what really catches your eye are the scent cones. These little marvels were worn directly on the head. Yep, ancient. Egyptians placed cones of solid perfume made from fat, resin, and flowers on top of wigs or shaved scalps. As they melted, they perfumed both hair and air, efficient and dramatic, and possibly itchy still. Imagine Cleopatra walking into a banquet hall with a cone of frankincense and blue lotus gently melting atop her head, releasing waves of scent as she moved. A living diffuser, a walking altar, a human incense stick. And here's the kicker. Everyone at the party had them. Royal or servant, you were expected to smell like you'd just stepped out of a divine bath. That bath probably involved moringa oil, rose water, and a little touch of cinnamon. You don't scrub in Cleopatra's world. You soak. You steep. And because scent was sacred, even death had its own perfume. In a room just off the perfumery, you stumble into the embalmer's chamber. The body of a noblewoman lies on a cool stone slab, surrounded by vials. The ritual is methodical. First, the body is washed in palm, wine, and Nile water. Then comes the scented resin cord anti-massaged into the skin. The goal, to preserve, yes, but also to prepare her to smell acceptable to the gods. You glance at the jars again. Cinnamon, cedar oil, and yes, musk. One recipe for mummification lists over 30 separate fragrances. They weren't embalming bodies. They were anointing souls. In Egypt, scent was proof of purity. If you didn't smell divine, you weren't fit for eternity. And maybe that's what Cleopatra understood best. Not just how to wear perfume, but how to use it as a language. A way of speaking to the gods, to her people, and to history itself. You inhale again. Somewhere in that breath is Kifi. Somewhere a note of juniper. Somewhere, maybe, just maybe her. You slip back outside, fingers still sticky with resin, and the Nile breeze greets you again, like an old friend now warmer, heavier, humming with the smell of night flowers and temple smoke. The sky is the color of a bruised fig, and across the water, torches flicker like fireflies on the palace balconies. You're not dreaming anymore, you're drifting, because in Cleopatra's world, perfume isn't just crafted, it's curated, worn, wielded like a weapon, but also like a whisper. And perhaps nowhere is that whisper louder than in the city of Mendes. You follow the Nile northward, passing lush groves of papyrus, fishermen pulling up nets, ibis birds skipping across the reeds. Still you arrive in the delta. This is not the glamorous Thebes or bustling Alexandria. Mendes is quieter, more fragrant. It's the capital of perfume production, the beating aromatic heart of ancient Egypt and its pride. The Mendesian perfume, it's said that even the wind changed direction when this scent was uncorked. The base was myrrh, yes, and cinnamon. Yes, but the true signature was Bolanos oil extracted from the nut of the desert date tree. Think olive. Oil's sultry cousin, but infused with roasted herbs, sun-thickened resin, and just a trace of sweetness. Mainstream fact: the Mendesian perfume was one of Egypt's top exports for centuries. The Greeks hoarded it. The Romans named ships after it, Cleopatra. She probably had barrels of it hidden in her private chambers, and more on her barges, just in case the breeze got lazy. Quirky tidbit: some amphorae still retain the scent. Modern archaeologists opened sealed perfume jars buried in tombs for over 2,000 years and caught faint notes of cedar, cinnamon, and almond. That's right, you can still smell Cleopatra's century if you know where to sniff. Historians still argue whether the Mendesian recipe was consistent across dynasties or adjusted with fashion and scarcity. Papyrus scrolls list varying ingredients, and one Roman source complains that a bad harvest of myrrh in Arabia ruined the season's perfume. Imagine living in a world where luxury depends on desert weather. But the city of Mendes didn't only bottle perfume, it bottled mood. You wander through its markets now, where perfumes are sold alongside sacred incense, cosmetics, and herbal tinctures. Here's a jar labeled Essence of Blue Lotus. There's a pouch of crushed marjoram, and in that gilded bottle, something labeled simply the breath of Isis. You crack it open, and immediately the scent takes you somewhere underwater and smoky, like a temple submerged in memory. You don't know how to describe it. You just feel calmer. That's the power Cleopatra mastered. Scent wasn't separate from politics or religion or medicine, it was those things. When she gifted Mark Antony with a vial of Mendesian perfume, she wasn't just giving him fragrance, she was giving him status, territory, a whisper that said, "You belong to my world now," and scent signaled class. 2. The royals, of course, wore the finest oils, imported frankincense from Punt, imported cedarwood from Lebanon. But the middle class, they made do with more local ingredients: mungoras, basil, bitter orange. Yet everyone wore something. Even the poorest farmers had access to perfumed ointments sold by apothecaries who wandered from village to village. And don't forget, perfume wasn't just worn, it was burned, sprinkled into oil lamps, swirled into bath water, steeped into wine. Some people even wrote letters with scented ink. Yes, your papyrus could smell like lilies and patchouli. Very extra. The wealthiest women, like Cleopatra, had entire perfume wardrobes. One oil for mornings, probably rose and mint, another for seduction, hello ambergris, and one just for prayer, myrrh and benzoin, naturally. You imagine her opening a box of vials and selecting one like a mood ring. Not what should I wear, but who do I want to become. You try one, know something, labeled simply evening. It smells like a garden trying to remember it's not a jungle. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you're not in Egypt. You're somewhere between stars and soil, between then and now. And it's not just you. Ancient records suggest that Cleopatra made custom perfumes for different occasions, for meetings with dignitaries, for sacred rites, and yes, for seductions. One scroll mentions a twilight oil, used during the hours when moonlight watches. Another details a preparation, requiring that it be mixed only during eclipses. That's dedication. Some modern perfumers have tried to recreate her scents. Using botanical archaeology, they've planted ancient strains of myrrh and blue lotus. They've sourced Bolanos oil. And while no one can quite agree on the formula, all agree on the experience. Cleopatra didn't wear perfume. She made perfume. Where you, and maybe you're starting to feel it now, that blend of sweet resin and smoky spice, that soft coating on your skin that feels like history reaching out and whispering across time. It's not overpowering, it's enveloping. Not loud, but inescapable. The kind of scent that clings to your dreams long after you've forgotten where you first caught it. And as the torches of Mendes begin to dim, and the Nile quiets again, you find yourself wondering what scent you would choose if you were to leave your mark on a scroll. A bottle, a lover's memory, would it be warm, like cedar, bright like citrus, earthy like patchouli? Or would it be like Cleopatra's impossible to describe, but never to be forgotten? You linger in the perfumed twilight, and as the wind from the Nile shifts ever so slightly, it pulls you along again further north, further back, further into the folds of a queen's legacy not written in wars or decrees, but in rituals of the skin. Because here's something no dusty scroll will tell you. Cleopatra's perfume wasn't just worn, it was layered. Like music, like spellwork, you wake in her private chamber, or at least what your half-dreaming mind imagines it might have been: alabaster walls laced with painted vines, soft linen draped from the ceiling, a stone basin steaming in the corner, and on a low cedar table beside you, a collection of small, delicate tiny spatulas, clay bowls, bronze mortar and pestles that have been used so often their handles shine. This isn't just grooming, this is alchemy. Mainstream fact. The ancient Egyptians were masters of cosmetic science. Their perfumers were chemists in linen, kilts, carefully distilling, emulsifying, infusing oils with resins, bark, spices, and rare flowers. Their recipes could take weeks to prepare, involving slow steeping in sun-warmed jars and precise timing based on the lunar calendar. And for Cleopatra, sequence mattered. The day began with a cleansing oil, usually castor or sesame, rubbed over the entire body. This lifted the sweat and sand of sleep, prepared the skin. Then came a rinse, sometimes with water scented with crushed mint and dried lime peels. After that, the layering began. You apply a base of Bolano's oil, thick and velvety, mixed with crushed marjoram and cinnamon bark. It sits on the skin like a soft hum. Over that, you add a dash of blue lotus, essence dreamy and floral, but with a hint of something darker, almost narcotic. You see why the priests used it during funerary rites. And finally, the highlight oilodab of rose and spikenard behind the ears, on the wrists, at the inner elbows. Not too much, never too much. Just enough to catch the attention of the air itself. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra developed these layering techniques herself or adapted them from priests and temple artisans. After all, the temples of Egypt were not only houses of worship, they were labs, libraries, manufacturing centers. Inside, perfumers worked under the eye of sacred order, blending scent with astrology and divination. You imagine Cleopatra as a young girl visiting these temples with her tutors, watching the ritual distillations with wide eyes, asking questions others didn't dare voice. Later, she'd bring that knowledge back to her palace tailor. It elevated, not just copying tradition, but remixing it like a DJ with a really good nose. Quirky tidbit: some perfumes were said to affect dreams. One papyrus recommends sleeping with a sachet of crushed iris root beneath the pillow to ensure visions of beauty. Another warns against using too much juniper oil before bed, it could summon restless spirits. You glance nervously at the vial in your hand. Just rosemary and myrrh. You hope. Cleopatra's nightly routine wasn't just about beauty, was about command. She used fragrance to regulate her emotions, to set the mood before negotiations, to steady herself before political theatre. Some sources claim she even wore different perfumes on each wrist, so that when she offered a handshake or a gesture, she controlled what her audience remembered. And remember, ancient perfumes didn't evaporate quickly like today's alcohol-based sprays. These were oil-based, slow release, designed to deepen with body heat. The more you moved, the more the scent unfolded. You didn't wear the perfume lived with you. You feel it now, the oil warming on your collarbone, softening into your skin. It smells like crushed rose petals left in the sun too long, like clove buds soaking in honeyed wine, like luxury you didn't know how to name until just now. But don't forget the oils that weren't for public show. Some were strictly private, for sleep, for sacred rites, for those moments when Cleopatra wasn't a queen but just a woman under a canopy of stars, letting the scent of crushed cardamom lull her into a trance. There's a recipe attributed to her, possibly myth, possibly not, that calls for equal parts myrrh, saffron, calamus, and honey. It was used during meditations to soften the veil between this world and the next. You try to picture her, seated cross-legged, eyes closed, the scent curling around her like smoke from a forgotten candle. Outside, the palace quiets, the wind hushes, and here she is, not plotting, not performing, but dreaming. And the dreams, they're perfumed. To dot in them, she drifts down the Nile on her golden barge, the river warm and slow beneath her, the sails soaked in jasmine oil so the entire journey leaves a fragrant wake. Fishermen look up and smell her passing before they see her. Lovers wake in nearby villages and wonder why their hearts feel heavier, sweeter. This is Cleopatra's world. You don't just breathe it, you wear it. And somewhere deep in your own skin, the scent lingers. You're still gliding, aren't you? Down that perfumed current, where the Nile no longer feels like a river, but more like an invisible silk ribbon, tugging you gently through time. A breeze brushes your cheek, it smells like temple incense, and a passing memory of cedar wood. You drift toward a quieter palace, a more secretive chamber, and here you learn, scent wasn't always for others. Sometimes it was a message to the gods. Welcome to the sacred olfactory theater of Cleopatra's temple offerings. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Egypt, religion and scent were inseparable. Incense wasn't just burned for fragrance, it was language. Temples were filled with it. Morning, noon, and sunset. Specific scents were timed to solar cycles. Frankincense at dawn, myrrh at high noon, and kifi at dusk. You didn't just pray, you perfumed your prayer. You watch as Cleopatra prepares her own blend, because yes, queens didn't just rule, they at a private altar tucked behind a courtyard fountain. She sits before bowls of powdered resins, dried herbs, and bits of sticky sap wrapped in linen squares. Her fingers move with quiet precision. No priests here tonight, no fanfare, just intention. She reaches for frankincense first, ground into a fine powder. It smells like lemon mixed with something resinous and ancient, like the sigh of a mountain. Then comes myrrh, darker, denser, sweet, with an edge of something funerary. A reminder that beauty and death have always danced closely in Egyptian thought. Into the bowl goes cinnamon bark, crushed hibiscus petals, a twist of orange rind. Then this part's rare, she adds honey, thick and golden, drizzled slowly like it's a sacred act. Finally, she stirs in wine. Red, spiced, possibly from a vineyard owned by the temple itself. The mixture will be shaped into small balls and dried. Later, they'll be burned on hot coals. And when they burn, they won't just perfume the room, they'll summon the divine. Scholars still argue whether Cleopatra's nightly rituals were religious devotion or calculated symbolism. After all, she styled herself not just as a monarch, but as Isis incarnate, a living goddess. When she made offerings, was she praying or performing godhood? Quirky tidbit. Some temple recipes call for the breath of sacred geese. No one's quite sure what that means. Goose fat, a type of incense, resin, a joke from a long-gone priest who got too poetic with his labeling. Regardless, you're grateful there are no geese here tonight. You inhale. The scent from the burning kifi is beginning to shift. It's no longer individual ingredients. It's become something new, warm, round, sweet with mystery. Ancient Egyptians believed that incense could carry words that as the smoke rose, so too did your thoughts, your dreams, your regrets. You imagine Cleopatra inhaling this same blend on the night before a major treaty, or a military gamble, or a seduction draped in gold. She stands barefoot on cool tile, arms raised, and as the smoke curls up her forearms and into her hair, she closes her eyes, not to sleep, not yet, but to commune. Because when you believe you are divine, sleep doesn't begin with dreams. It begins with a ritual performed in scent and silence. You reach for the small stone burner beside you. Hypothetical, of course. You're still lying in your bed, but in your mind's palm, the surface is warm. You watch as the smoke unfolds, serpentine and slow. It curls through your fingers, rises above your head, and disappears into the ceiling of your imagined chamber. A sudden breeze from the Nile, maybe even real breeze. The aroma to the other side of the water. Someone on a distant shore smells it and pauses. No queen in sight, but the presence is unmistakable, and you begin to see how scent, for Cleopatra, was present without touch. She didn't always need to be in the room to command it. Her symbolic, divinely aligned spoke volumes in her absence. There's an account, likely exaggerated but delightfully so, of Cleopatra approaching Julius Caesar by sea. Her ship was said to be perfumed with incense, so potent that Rome could smell her before she arrived. The sails soaked in jasmine and rose. The oarsmen doused in oil. The river itself turned into a kind of olfactory red carpet. That's what you're inhaling now, not just smoke and spice, but a queen's strategy. A language made of particles so small they bypass logic and head straight for the hippocampus. Right into memory. You wonder what your own scent trail would say if you left one behind. Could you distill your essence into a vial? Would it smell like coffee and library dust, dryer sheets and sun-warmed notebooks? Or maybe it would be simpler, like rain on concrete and the final page of a good book. But back to Cleopatra. She kneels before her burner, not to pray in the way we might, but to merge with myth, with power, with the divine femininity she curated so meticulously. Her eyes are half-lidded. She breathes slowly. Each inhale an invocation, each exhale a release. And you, lucky dreamer, get to sit beside her, inhale beside her, and for one soft, scented moment, exist beyond time. Let the smoke linger. Let it soften the corners of your thoughts. Let it carry something sacred across the river, just in case the gods are still listening. The smoke fades, but the memory stays. You're drifting again, lulled by the heat-hazed scent trail that still hovers like a ribbon across your senses. But now you're somewhere quieter, beyond the palace, beyond the temples. You follow the breeze upriver into small villages where everyday life hums softly in rhythm with the Nile. And this, oddly enough, is where scent gets even more fascinating. Not everything about Cleopatra's perfumed world was royal or ritual. A huge part of what made her mastery of fragrance so effective was how it echoed and elevated everyday Egyptian scent culture. Because long before rose oil met Roman senators, there were local perfumers working behind simple wooden counters, grinding resins and bottling aroma like it was just another crop from the earth. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Egypt had one of the oldest commercial perfume industries on record. Perfumers were respected artisans. Their recipes kept secret, passed down like heirlooms. The town of Mendes in the Nile Delta was so famous for its perfume that Greek travelers later referred to its exports simply as Mendesian, and everyone knew what you meant. You trail behind one of these perfumers now, barefoot across reed mats in a cool, shaded workshop. No grand marble pillars, here just clay pots, bronze mortar, and herbs drying in bundles from the ceiling. The perfumer is a woman, older than Cleopatra, with nimble fingers and a nonsense scowl. She's mixing something with crushed calamus root and wild mint, a base of moringa oil, and one drop of something so pungent your nose hairs curl, possibly blue lotus, possibly fermented fig paste, possibly something she refuses to name, a fringe tidbit. There's evidence that some of these perfumes were meant to be eaten. Not all of them, of course, but certain scented oils were mixed with honey and wine, taken as aphrodisiacs or digestion aids, or, if you were bold, both. Imagine chewing on a perfume that tastes like roses, cloves, and sun-warmed limestone. Slightly alarming, yes, but fascinating. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians truly believed in the therapeutic power of scent, or whether it was all just luxury and symbolism. But scrolls and temple walls show people rubbing their chests with scented pastes for coughs, massaging perfumed oil into their temples for headaches, even applying special blends to ward off bad dreams. You pause under a fig tree and rub your fingers together. Somehow, you're holding a bit of oil of phantom smear with hints of cinnamon and date syrup. Maybe your perfumer friend passed it to you. Maybe you imagined it. Either way, it smells warm, like the idea of comfort made tangible. And it's not just humans who get scented. Picture this: your cat, sacred and aloof, lounging beside a reed fire. A servant dabs the tiniest dot of lavender oil behind her ears. For the gods, of course. For balance. Because if a divine feline sneezes, you don't want it to be your fault. You chuckle softly at the image, and the perfumer glances your way, eyebrow arched, as if to say, "Don't mock the rituals, child." You nod solemnly, lesson learned, down. A narrow path, a cluster of women sit near the riverbank, weaving papyrus. Each has a small pot beside her, scented clay, rubbed under the arms, or maybe smeared through the hair. It isn't perfume like we think of today, it's survival. Egypt is hot, sweaty, and full of flies. Scent, here, is defense. But it's also charm, and mood. And memory. You think about the head cones worn at festivals, waxy pyramids of scented fat perched atop elaborate wigs. They melted slowly throughout the evening, releasing fragrance and occasionally dribbling down your neck. It's like a scented candle made wearable. Historians still argue whether people really wore them in daily life or just during parties. But tomb art insists. If you wanted to smell festive, you wore a cone. Suddenly, the breeze shifts again. It smells like something richer now. Not royal, not sacred, just human. The scent of bread baking, of sweat mixing with crushed mint, of river water warming under midday sun. You realize Cleopatra's perfume empire wasn't just built on rare imports and goddess branding. It was built on this, on the village oils, the gossip of perfumers, the pickled figs soaking in resin jars. She collected smells the way a poet collects words, not just the pretty ones, but the pungent, the strange, the real, and you're floating somewhere in the middle now, between palace and village, between jasmine, oil, and garlic breath, between mythology and sweat. You reach for your imaginary linen wrap, one dipped lightly in rosewater and sandalwood. You press it to your neck, slowly, gently, not because anyone's watching, but because it feels right, because scent is an act of presence, of care. As you inhale again, you're not just in Cleopatra's world, you're part of it, smelling what she smelled, feeling what she likely felt when she passed one of these riverside workshops and paused for just a moment to breathe it in. A recipe here, a whispered secret there, a scent that would linger on the folds of a letter, on the hem of a robe, on the memory of someone long gone but never fully forgotten. And you smile, because in a world where memory fades and time dissolves, scent remains, like you, still here, carried on a breeze older than language. You breathe in again, and now the Nile smells different. It's dusk. The river reflects streaks of purple and gold, softening every edge, even the jagged limestone temples in the distance. You're somewhere between history and myth again, riding the slow perfume trail that refuses to settle. It curls around you like silkenly this time. There's something bittersweet about it, because even the most enduring scents eventually fade. And so we arrive at the part no one really talks about, how it all disappeared, not in one great fire or a dramatic overthrow. No, the fall of Cleopatra's perfume legacy was slow, uneven, almost like a scent evaporating, gradual, frustrating, quiet. You stand outside what was once a great perfume lab in Alexandria. The walls are half fallen now. Dust hangs in the air like old breath. Some say it was destroyed when Rome took the city. Others whisper it declined with the fall of Cleopatra herself. Either way, her world of scent, once the envy of every noblewoman from Antioch to Athens, crumbled into memory. Mainstream historical fact: after Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE, Rome seized control of Egypt, and while the Romans adored Egyptian perfumes, they also reshaped everything: religion, governance, even fashion. Slowly, local Egyptian perfume centers were replaced or absorbed. Alexandria's famous perfume workshops, gone. The secret recipes faded into oral lore, lost in translation, or more likely deliberately erased. Fringe tidbit: some modern perfume historians believe that Cleopatra's private blend, her most seductive weapon, was never replicated again because it relied on a now extinct type of myrrh, harvested only from a small region along the Eritrean coast. Others suggest the ingredient still exists, but the extraction method has been forgotten. Like knowing the secret chord but losing the fingers that could play it. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra actually wrote down her formulas. Some insist she left behind a scroll or two notes hidden in temple vaults or sealed inside her tomb, wherever that may be. Others say her recipes were coded into the hieroglyphs of her time, disguised as poetry or ritual instructions. And then there are those who believe she never wrote them down at all. That scent, for her, was too sacred, too personal to imprison on paper. You crouch in the ruins, brushing your fingers against the dry earth. It smells of dust, yes, but also maybe of something once floral. Phantom traces cling to stone, like ghost scent. A perfume too stubborn to completely vanish. The wind picks up. Somewhere in the distance, a market still burns incense. But you know the difference. That's modern frankincense, sharper, less sultry. Cleopatra's was different, warmer, like memory mixed with mischief. And here's a strange comfort. Fragrance doesn't die, it transforms. That's how Cleopatra's olfactory empire has survived. Not in original bottles, not in flawless recreations, but in echoes. Every time someone lights a cinnamon candle on a chilly night, or dabs rose oil on their wrists before a date, or spritzes themselves with something musky, not for anyone else, but just to feel powerful, that's a whisper of her. In 2012, archaeologists uncovered remnants of an ancient perfume factory near Cairo. What did they find? Not intact vials, never survive, but residue, fragrance-infused clay shards, and one charred lump of what might have been a head cone. The past, crumbling at the edges but still smelling faintly of balsam. You tilt your head back and look at the stars. There, the same ones she saw, the same constellations that watched her dress for banquets and sailed down the Nile, trailing sandalwood and vanilla into the night. Do you think she knew her scent would outlive her? Probably. She was, after all, a queen who played with immortality. Like it was an herb in her spice rack. You rise slowly. The scent has changed again. This time, it's yours. Not entirely hers. Not entirely the village perfumers or the temple priestesses. A blend of everything you've passed through, fig and jasmine, desert wind and market spice, loss and memory. You walk along the riverbank once more, and the breeze welcomes. You like an old friend. The night is softer now. No drama, no war, just the echo of a scent that once ruled an empire. And even if we never find her tomb, never recover her handwritten formulas, never recreate the exact proportions of her oils, we still carry her in every breath that stirs, memory in every scent that makes the world pause, in every evening when you close your eyes and drift back again to a queen, a bottle and the breeze that still remembers her. The night deepens. The stars burn a little brighter now, as if scent alone had polished the sky. You're almost there at the place where story and sleep finally meet. But before you go, there's one last scene to take in. Not a temple, not a palace, just a quiet cove on the Nile, far from any road or scroll, where the wind carries something so delicate you barely notice it at first. It's the afterglow of legacy. See, Cleopatra's perfume wasn't just a vanity project. It was a worldview, an ideology of scent. She believed, deeply and intentionally, that fragrance had power not just over desire or diplomacy, but over memory, emotion, even identity itself. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient texts describe Cleopatra not only as a consumer of perfumes, but as an innovator commissioning blends, hosting alchemical experiments, and selecting ingredients to reflect mood, season, or purpose. Scent wasn't background music to her. Rain It was her signature soundtrack, and that legacy seeped into everything after her. Roman women adopted the practice of scenting not just their bodies, but their clothes, fans, and even their walls. Perfume shops flourished in Pompeii. In medieval Europe, Arabian chemists picked up the thread with steam distillation, giving rise to the first recognizable perfume bottles. French aristocrats would later keep sachets of herbs inside their wigs. The thread from Cleopatra's oil, press wove across centuries, fringe tidbits. Some believe Napoleon's obsession with Kelowna, reported 60 bottles a month, was inspired by Egyptian traditions he encountered during his campaign there. Whether or not it's true, the image of Napoleon spritzing citrus over his boots before a battlefield somehow feels like an echo of Cleopatra scenting her sails. Historians still argue whether the Queen's perfumed legacy directly shaped Europe's eventual multi-billion-dollar fragrance industry. But many agree it was Cleopatra who turned scent from ritual to lifestyle, from sacred to seductive, from practical to unforgettable. You dip your fingers into the river one last time. The water smells faintly of tamarind and dust. You let a few drops trail down your wrist, like you're applying a phantom oil. You imagine what her perfume must have actually smelled like, not the modern recreations, not the guesses, but the real thing. Something lush, something warm, something slightly bitter underneath, like a secret only she understood. It lingers now, even as your eyelids start to grow heavy. You can almost feel the wax of a head cone softening into your scalp, perfuming your dreams drop by drop. Cleopatra knew something we forget, that you can't always trust what you hear or what you see, but your nose, that's honest. That's memory's front door. She knew the future would forget her face, maybe even her voice, but not her smell. And tonight, somehow, you found your way to it, through temples and tombs, market stalls and ruined labs. You followed the breeze that remembers Herfant, insistent, impossible to pin down. You exhale slowly, and for a moment, the world smells perfect. And now, you rest. The scent fades, but it doesn't disappear. It lingers gently, like a ribbon of warmth along your neck, your collarbone, your breath, no longer sharp, no longer strong, just enough to remind you you've been somewhere strange and beautiful tonight. The Nile drifts behind your eyelids now, not as a river, but as a feeling. Still water, perfumed breeze, and the hush of ancient jasmine. The world grows soft around the edges. Footsteps blur into sand. Temple torches dim into fireflies. The whisper of sandalwood carries you toward stillness. No more questions, no more scrolls, just the quiet echo of presence. Your presence in a place built on beauty, mystery, and memory. You're safe here. The sails are scented. The wind is gentle. The past is no longer something you chase, but something that wraps around you like silk, like a dream. Let your thoughts loosen. Let the images dissolve like oil into water. A golden vial on a polished stone. A sprig of myrrh beneath a fig tree. The faintest breath of lotus at the edge of a royal bed. And somewhere, a queen smiles in the dark. Her work is done. Her perfume still floats on the breeze. You carry it now. You always will. Sleep well.